meeting, and today is July 12th, 2021. You should see the agenda. I'm sharing it. If not, let me know. The first item of order here is OpenDataHub Release 1.1, which we've been working on. We're actually probably a couple of weeks late on it, but we did have an issue with regards to Kubeflow 1.3 example KFDev. We had to change it from a tag-based poll, manifest poll. It was previously a branch-based manifest poll, and evidently the branches are not something that are stable in Kubeflow. So that's done. Our PR from the community operator is merged, so you will see a new OpenDataHub 1.1 today if you try to download it from the operator hub. We are working on the release notes and the documentation, and that would include the blogs and changing some of the documentation that we have on OpenDataHub.io. Any questions with regards to the new release? All right, so moving along. Second item of order here is the team is working on a component contribution guidelines, and I'm going to go through it really quick. It's still work in progress, so if you're interested in contributing or comments on it, please follow the link here that I have in the agenda, and it will take you to the issue. Let's go over some of the guidelines that we have. So this will apply to any new component that's being submitted to OpenDataHub. It does not apply to new incremental fixes and fixes for components or any little new features, but it mostly applies to things that are big enough to change an architecture or introduce a lot of changes to OpenDataHub for a big component. The first basic requirements that we have is basically that it has to be an open source project with a valid open source license. It should align with OpenDataHub goals, architecture, and roadmaps. The roadmap we're working on, and then we're still working on trying to iron out what the exact goals and architecture are for OpenDataHub, and we'll have this documentation here pretty soon. All build and source files for the component must be publicly available. We promote and recommend using UBI-based images for all the images that are included in the new component or new feature. And of course, the component must run on OpenShift or OKD platform. The first step is to create a proposal. The proposal should have a high-level description of the component, how it works together, some low-level implementation of how it's going to integrate into the OpenDataHub code, and that document will be in a proposal folder that we have in the community GitHub repo that we have right here. And then after we create the proposal, we suggest that you come to the OpenDataHub community meeting, present your new component, new features, and let the community comment on it and give their opinion. And then after that, you open an issue, and most of the discussion on whether this is going to be accepted or not, whether it aligns into OpenDataHub, kind of general umbrella of how things are, is within the issue. So this is where we'll have the discussion and we'll decide whether this is a go forward or not. And if it is a go forward, and the last step would be to submit the pull request, and we ask that the pull request not only just include all the code, but also include testing and integration with the testing environment that we have. If it does have a UI, the element, it must integrate with the OpenDataHub dashboard. And of course, the last step is every component that is added new to OpenDataHub must have a Prometheus endpoint for metric gathering. Any questions, comments with regards to these new guidelines? All right. So again, like I said, this is still open. It's still being worked on. It's under the pull request here. So any comments, changes that you have, you can contribute to this pull request for this contribution. All right, number 3, we have Landon discussing our OpenDataHub image and build file locations. So Landon, I'll open the floor for you.
Yeah, so this is obviously a follow-on to the new community contributor guidelines. I think we have a requirement so that all of the components should be kind of open source, have open files, but we need to extend that to the container images. So if we're lucky, a project has all of their build files open and available. A lot of times, well, I don't want to say a lot, but there are times where they just have links to kind of pre-built images and we can't reproduce them. So, best case scenario that they have these build files that are available, built with kind of secure technology. If we're lucky, it's UBI, but that's not always the case. So in OpenDataHub, I know we've run into situations where we had to rebuild images, either to work on OpenShift because the original image was built with Kubernetes in mind and none of the security concerns, or we want to incorporate UBI or add a fix. Like recently, we rebuilt the superset image to have to enable support for Trino. So this discussion has been around for a while. I did not originate this kind of discussion. Actually, Ricardo was the original requester of this repo, but I just want to open the floor to discuss like what comments like anybody had for the format of this. The idea is that we would house any images that we custom build. Maybe a custom build could be kind of, literally customizing the Docker files or S2I files. It could be rebuilding with a different base image than the original project. So maybe it was built with Ubuntu or just CentOS and we want to use UBI. Or it could be kind of a complete like custom where we take parts of the Docker file and like rebuild it for the most part or edit it to work on OpenShift. We've done this for other operators like Airflow or anything else that was designed to work on Kubernetes, but we're the ones doing the legwork to bring it to OpenShift. And in the case that we're not modifying any of the build configs, like this would also house the instructions for how to rebuild. I think a lot of times we rely on kind of operate first pipelines to do everything, and there's no clear guidance for how we can rebuild it or any user can rebuild these images. So this wouldn't be specific to Jupyter Notebooks. This could be any of the component images. But there's kind of concerns like how do we handle situations where the upstream project maybe has a license and they may be concerned about us housing a duplicate of that. So I just want to open the floor to any discussions, things that we need to be aware of and like how we should best handle that. And from there, I'll just let anybody comment.
So
No
Landon,
comments?
so Landon, this is more than just location for the builds and images. I mean, I guess there's code location, there's image location, and then there's the guidelines on how to build that image.
Exactly.
Okay. And then,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
I was just gonna say, are you suggesting, because I don't think we can boil the ocean because all these images are coming from anywhere and everywhere. I'm just thinking, are you suggesting writing guidelines on how we want this to come into OpenDataHub?
We can, I mean, the guidelines don't have to be kind of, they can be just simple. Hey, if you customize any portion of this, at the very least have instructions to document what you did. In a perfect world, it would have documentation plus the actual steps to rebuild it so that a user, if they literally just want to rebuild it from source, they can run the same commands and do it. And then there's another question. Do we want to host this in ODH Images repo, which we already have, which is ported over from the GitLab org, or if we want to host this on OpenDataHub.io? I know we get questions on kind of how to rebuild things. I don't know if it falls under falls under what OpenDataHub.io is used for, or if we should just kind of keep this all in this one central image repository.
Oh, you mean the Quay one?
Well, no, this OpenDataHub.io. So there wouldn't be a Quay repository specifically for ODH images unless we want to do that. The goal would be just to have the source files here
and
so
then building
anybody,
them.
Right, yeah.
So Landon, would that give us the ability or give users of OpenDataHub the ability to customize the images, like build something that's a derivative of what we're providing and do a layer of customization on top of it?
That's the idea. At the very minimum, yeah, they should just be able to rebuild it bit for bit, but this would give them the ability to extend it the same way we're doing the same process or the same idea we're doing from the upstream component, I should say. So we're just kind of paying it forward. Yeah, correct.
Okay.
I mean, for fixes too, right? Bug fixes? Not just not just adding to it.
Well, now the question is the bug fix in the image build, or is the bug fix in the upstream project or OpenDataHub project? So this is kind of so in the absence of these build files being hosted on OpenDataHub-IO org, so within the project or even the upstream project, this is where we're taking ownership of something that for some reason can't live within that project file. So a good example is the work that Vashek did for the initial Kubeflow work to add a Docker UBI file or UBI Docker file. That lives in the Kubeflow, I think, kfctl repo. So we don't necessarily need a entry in ODH images. But in the case of like Airflow, so the Airflow operator, I think Verdant at the time tried to submit a PR to get these changes into Airflow, but it stagnated for some reason. So the custom build for this would live in ODH images until we could get it into Airflow properly.
I think it's generally a good idea to have these midstream things. And I think like this concept of like, I would like old terminology would be kind of self-hosting. So you know, part of what we do is not only give you images, but basically give you the tools to build the images. You know, that used to be kind of a core principle of RHEL, for example, and of Fedora. I think Fedora still has that. That like we want the user basically be able to reproduce the build. I think that's overall the right way of doing things to create real open source community. So I think this is the right path.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that also gives us the most flexibility moving forward, especially if we're looking at ways in which we're going to be looking at like providing the ability to build custom notebook images and other custom images for people wanting that feature. It seems like this is a nice foundational change.
Yeah, and like so that's where I think, well, in a way, like the goal of Thoth is to do that for the notebook images or like the stacks inside the images and get, we call it predictable builds or predictable pipelines, I guess. I know. Changing a little bit, but the idea is kind of, you know, give you the reproducibility. So I'd like to see, like, can we connect, at least loosely connect the concepts there and maybe capture that kind of information, use the same pipelines. I think that because this overall, I'm getting a little bit philosophical here, right? But if you look like what is any kind of binary software distribution, right? It's a combination of the information on which version of which set of content, you know, with which version of the other build ingredient, with which build time configuration gives you a certain result, right? That's what the Linux distribution basically is, that combination. And ODH, in a way, like on the software side, if you don't include the operational side, is that same thing, you know, for a set of higher level data science components that, you know, and if you use them together, they will work together, things like that. So getting, like, making that information explicit and reproducible, in the end, I think is really important to like maximize the utility for the end user, right? And then we want to get into this motivate the subscription, right? We sell to people as a Red Hat, right? Or the value of the open source community. It actually is this ongoing stream of capability. I know maybe that's too meta, but you know, I think this is really where we want to go in the long term with everything we do.
So, Daniel, when you were talking, I guess at the start, were you commenting on potentially having these midstream images be supported by Thoth, like a Thoth build pipeline?
Well, I that would like or adjust, like right now this is at a different level, I think, than what DOS does. But like if you abstract one level, it should like it's kind of trying to do the same thing, right? Reproducible builds, right? So maybe like ideally we would have the ability to join that in the long term. But that's I don't think that anything is ready right now, but at least we should like try to reuse concepts if they make sense. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. Yeah.
Like it's a very like philosophical level at which I am, right? Like the idea behind TOS is that it had like TOS should be the idea behind TOS is to give you guidance on how to put certain things together to achieve a previously observed outcome, right? Or a predictable outcome, right? Like in recombining things. So if you take these versions, compile them these wise, put them in a container image in this combination, the result will have this effect, right? And it's just like right now it's only Python, so anything that's not Python right now it can't help you.
Okay, so it sounds like we're kind of all in agreement that like we should have this midstream. I guess the question would be, as far as the contribution guidelines, like we can have either or put in the requirement for the actual contributor making this available within their own org or repo that we can link to, or if it's custom for ODH, say they don't want to support UBI or not. A rebuild for UBI, and we do it for ODH, then we require that it lives within this image repo with corresponding documentation.
I think the requirement should be for the UBI, and then, as you said, the like either it lives in the upstream repo, and then I think the requirement should be that the ODH images at least have that folder and the README pointing to the Docker file, so that where we end up is that we have link to a Docker file for every component, for every image we use, ideally, because that will kind of give us that overall view of what we actually use and kind of what Daniel was talking about, not built by thought, but at least having that knowledge of what is part of ODH. And then if we definitely want a component where the upstream doesn't care about UBI or doesn't want to support it or something, we need to make it ourselves, make the image ourselves, then it goes to that repo. So in general, definitely yes, and I would personally like to at least see links to those images that we don't have Docker files for in that repo, linked from that repo.
Okay.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. And I guess last bit is legal. Does anybody know of any licensing issues with this, or is it just treated as a fork of any project? So fair use as long as it's open? Okay, we're good to go then.
It's all open. No, we should look into it, but it's probably tied to what the open source code license is. Typically, the images are tied to that. So, Landon, I'm saying as a conclusion or action item for number 3, can you summarize what we discussed here in the contribution guideline issue, and then we can add it to the contribution guideline for images?
Yes. Yep.
All right, sounds good. Any other comments on item number 3? All right, thanks everyone. Moving on to number 4, we have a presentation from Animesh, Machine Learning Exchange. Is Animesh here? Yep. I'll go ahead and give you the screen, Animesh.
Hey, thanks, Juana. Just a couple of things like there used to be an email, right, for ODH meetings. Is that email thread still active? Because I do see, like quite a bit of the people from IBM who used to be regular, they're not there. So there are a couple of things. One, like the meeting invite which you sent, Jay, that had a Google Meet link, right? So we all sort of, jumped into that, and then towards the bottom of that, this was the link. The other thing was, it was pointing to a GitLab link for a meeting agenda, which I presume based on, what I was seeing, you are not using anymore. You are using the GitHub link, right? So maybe that's probably preventing some of the folks to be aware of and joining. So not for today, but like maybe, some of these logistical things to be cleared up for the next
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, our meeting notice has not changed. I might have to change a link in it. Yep, I'll look at it.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
I noticed some inconsistencies there as well. Animesh had to go. I think there's a couple of things we need to clean up on our side to get it all synchronized.
Yeah, in the past, Jim Sporer used to be our guy. Like he used to send an invite for majority of us, right? That hey, this is the meeting at this time. So now it's like we will have to probably track, or maybe one of us can play Jim Sporer here. I'll probably try to be so that rest of the team is aware of it and can join. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks. So I have Christian and Tommy from my team with me, right? And they're the primary lead developers on Machine Learning Exchange. So I'll quickly go through the presentation, and then hopefully we'll have a couple of demos, and then we can discuss a bit, where does it make sense in the context of ODH, or does it make sense, right? Okay, this is probably, I had to reinstall BlueJeans today, so it's asking me to give some permissions. Let me first get through that. Strange. So, okay, something is like it's, in the meanwhile, can Christian, maybe you try sharing your screen? See if you are lucky to have the, oh, okay. Okay, saying that I will have to quit and reopen to share. So I'll drop off. Christian, if you're sure you can share, you can get started maybe. Yeah.
Christian, we can see your screen, but we can't hear you. Maybe we can hear you now. Yeah,
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't find like a mic button where I can mute or unmute myself.
Okay, I'm back. Let me try to share now.
Oh, okay.
Christian, it should be at the top middle. That's where it is.
Oh, it's popping. It's popping
Yeah,
up
it
some.
pops up. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, Animesh, I also had a delay. Are you ready? Sorry.
Can you see my screen, guys?
Yep, it looks good, Animesh.
Okay, then we can. So I think for a lot of you, you're probably aware of the project, with the prior name OpenAI and in fact, I believe it was Steven or Daniel, right? You requested the name to be changed from OpenAI to something else because of the conflict with OpenDataHub. So this is the new name, Machine Learning Exchange. The project is now part of Linux Foundation AI and Data. It's hosted through that. I will pretty quickly, show. And why essentially we did this. So essentially, I think, we are all building these things and we are aware, like, in the end, the work is getting centered, or the assets which we are looking at are essentially getting centered around the three pillars, right? Which is data, models, and pipelines, right? Most of the assets which are being produced, and notebooks, right, which is the build side of the code, right, but then goes into the build model space, right? So if you're looking and entering the space from an assets perspective, like what are the output artifacts of data and AI lifecycle, right? It's data sets, it's models, notebooks, and pipelines, right? Now, you can probably name, smallish scripts here and there, but in the end, like this is what, if you are looking at the end of the data lifecycle, it's a refined data set. the whole machine life cycle, the end output is a model. And then, you have pipelines, which are essentially, whether it's on the data side or machine learning side. And now definitely, behind the scenes, I mean, that was a very simplistic view, but behind the scenes, like, these steps are very complicated, right? Each of these steps where when you are in the data part of the life cycle, right, you are going through cleansing, ingestion, feature engineering, validation, splitting, model life cycle, as we are aware, right? It goes through that whole gamut of things. And finally, once you are deploying, which is where large part of that thing should finish is but no, in case of machine learning, you are deploying, then you have the standardized API interplane, then you want to have explainability, drift, anomaly, bias, normal monitoring, and then based on that you want to be able to do fine tuning and improvements. So like there are pipelines playing at every of these, the three layers, the data sets, the models, and once your models are deployed. So machine learning exchange essentially, our attempt here is to enter the space from the assets perspective, right? So what if you have a set of assets, right, which you want to bring to a central catalog, from a perspective of sharing and reuse, because within IBM, there are still a lot of teams which are sort of doing quite a bit of duplication. Creating similar models. There are similar pipelines, if not pipelines, there are similar components like they're creating again and again, and there was no one central place, right, where you go and look, and if you don't find something, definitely go ahead and create, right? But if you go ahead and create something which you didn't find, right, also upload and surface for others to reuse, right? So central place for all these different assets, data sets, models, pipelines, notebooks, pipeline components. And then, instead of just taking a catalog view at it, we said, okay, well, if you come and register your assets with this platform, with the machine learning exchange, you get some additional services, bonus services. Now, what are those bonus services? Okay, if you've registered a model, based on your model metadata, we will give you automated pipelines so you can deploy that model with the embedded engine in the platform. If you're bringing a data sets, right, we give you embedded pipelines, which can then, download your data sets on a PVC, etc., so that you're ready for distributed training. Right. So for every single asset, so if you're registering, for example, a notebook, yes, then behind the scenes, an automated pipeline is generated, which can then launch your notebook as a batch job, right? So for every asset which you are registering, there will be some additional capabilities, which obviously, we are tapping into our MLOps and Qflow ecosystem to find the relevant projects which have been integrated. Right. And it's like eating your own dog food. Qflow pipelines on Tecton is as we all know, is the basis of our Watson pipelines engine. KF serving with model mesh is going to be the basis of our Watson machine learning. So that also gives us, a strong incentive to reuse the open source engine under the covers, right, which we are essentially productizing in our products. So as I mentioned, so pipelines part is more straightforward. So at a very simplest level, you go to this and you can download assets, right? So, or then, as I mentioned, the bonus capabilities are more execution oriented. So before, going into showing some of the execution functionalities, right? So it's already hosted, right? So we are jointly working with machine learning, Linux Foundation AI and Data, and hosted it here, mlexchange.org. Currently said there are some other discussions happening with LFAI, but hosted in only read-only format, right? When I say read-only format, that means, you can just download the assets for now, right? Download the metadata. So everything right now, the default capabilities for each of these, that you can read the metadata and you can download. So for example, as I was saying, right, in context of models, when the model is registered with this YAML definition, we generated a sample model serving code, right, which can deploy this model in this context of the embedded KF serving engine. But the hosted platform doesn't give you the execution capabilities. It's all download. You can download pipelines package, and when you actually download anything, right, you get a zip file or TGZ file, right, which has all the assets which are nested. Similarly for notebooks. And so now, so components are essentially in this case like the individual pipeline components, and this is where we see majority of the duplication happening. So hoping this is one place where we can get a lot of these standard components which are being built across IBM, right, for Tecton and Qflow pipelines. registered at one single place. So this is, the basic capability which is hosted, but under the covers, right, if somebody goes to GitHub, so you can find this on GitHub, right? So if you go to GitHub and if you deploy it on your own, so there are different deployment mechanisms available, right, using Docker Compose or on Kubernetes or OpenShift, right, or on an existing Kubeflow cluster. Then you get more, right? And the more is like essentially, as I was talking about, right, beyond just a catalog where you can share and reuse assets, right? You have embedded capabilities from the underlying. So in case of pipelines, obviously you can launch pipelines, you can stream the logs like we are aware of Kubeflow pipelines code. In case of models, if you have registered a model and the metadata of the model tells us that, this can be deployed. In this case, you see that the target platforms are Kep serving and Kubernetes. So then, you can launch the behind the scenes automated generated pipeline and then deploy it. So this is the deployed view of the model. And you can, look at some more details around, the traffic to your model, etc. By the integrated KLA dashboard. And then similarly, with data sets, the integration is with the underlying, the DataShim project, which allows you to download and create PVCs from where, you can launch distributed training using, the registered notebooks, etc. And notebooks, which is currently using the Elira notebook component to launch notebooks, so you can preview the notebook content. And if you want, right, you can just launch it as a batch job using the integrated pipelines engine. So that's essentially, the construct behind it, and there are a couple of demos, right? Christian and Tommy can show, but hopefully, this gives you a good idea of, where this is playing. The reason for us to be front-ending it with the Next Foundation AI is that, we want some of the participating companies in the ecosystem of LF AI and data to be actually bringing their own models, their own data sets, etc., and sharing it through it. We don't want to make it an IBM only story, and it should not be an IBM only story, because that will be the real success from that perspective, right, where we actually get community contributions in terms of the data sets and the models, right, which are hosted on part of this platform. Okay, and I think you're aware of the projects which are integrated, especially, the audience here. So Kubeflow Pipelines and Tekton, DataShim, which is, I believe, also part of the ODH, and then, the Kep serving engine, right, and the Elira. Okay, so we can probably go into demos, and before that, any questions?
Animesh, I had a question. I'm still trying to understand what the use case is. Is it a place where users can upload their models and pipelines and other users can download them? Is that how I understand it or run them?
Yeah, it's a central marketplace for your AI pipelines, pipeline components, data sets, models, and not only the UX, but you also get, REST APIs. So essentially, like our product teams use this concept of a component registry. So there is a REST API backing each asset type. So, for something like Elira, or in our case, a product, right, they can pull the components using these REST APIs, right, and provide users to construct their own pipelines out of that. And you can test individual components here directly without having a need to create a pipeline, right, which KFP doesn't allow you to do right now. You have to have a pipeline. So all these.
Go ahead. And is the use case here that somebody who maybe DevOps who's installing OpenDataHub on their cluster will have this available for everybody within a company, or I don't see as an individual user installing it.
Yeah, like, so it obviously is, the primary is sharing and reuse. Like, so you will have to have organization, like just for yourself, probably there is not much enough need, right? Right, for you to be creating this central catalog of all these data sets and models, right? So there has to be a collaborative use case where, you have more than one people, creating these assets.
And all these artifacts, I couldn't tell where they were stored. Are they stored locally on the cluster or anywhere? Is it configurable?
They are configurable, right? So majority of them are not stored on the cluster. In fact, the metadata tells where they are stored, and then, machine learning exchange is smart enough to know based on that metadata how to pull that when it is running the pipelines. But the data sets are stored right now on IBM Cloud Object Storage. The model also are pulled from there, right? So they're not actually stored when you stand up Machine Learning Exchange. They're not actually stored there. Now, having said that, there is an inbuilt Minio server, right? If someone wants to store locally, and then while registering point as part of the metadata to the local asset, they can do that. But
Okay.
yeah.
I don't want to derail the demo. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to just say, I see model learning exchange or machine learning exchange as, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Animesh, but what we had attempted to do with AI library, and we just didn't have a chance to put enough resources into it, where it's a collaborative space where you can not only share the models, but the pipelines that are used to manage and build those models. So as we're looking at ways in which we're going to deprecate AI library, I think this might be a nice way to replace it with something that has a little more traction and a lot more meat on it.
I actually disagree. I feel like what you're getting here is basically an empty skeleton of what all the things that you want, and you have to fill it up. With AI library, we had it filled up with with models that people can download. I feel like OpenDataHub should integrate with MLX Exchange to be able to post artifacts and maybe download artifacts, but I'm not really clear on that it should be installable from OpenDataHub.
I think this is a fair question to Animesh. Sorry, Animesh, if we go on. Sorry.
I was going to answer Juana's question. It's both. It's a framework, right, to register your assets, to share and use, but also there are the default assets which are pre-integrated, which come as part of it, right? So the metadata for all these different models and data sets which you saw, if you go to, let me see again, share again. Yeah, so this is the GitHub organization, right? So if you go there, there is a project called, so this is the framework. MLX here specifically is the framework part of it, right? Which is you deploy this and then you get the framework to register, download, execute. Then there is the catalog project, which is essentially what is the default content, right? Which is part of it, right? So the pipelines, pipeline components, models, data sets, which you see here, they come out of the box by default, right? And if somebody wants to register others by default, right, this is a PR back to this repo, right? So that's how we are envisioning. It's both the framework as well as the assets. Now, obviously, it doesn't have to be the exact same replica. Somebody can have totally different set of assets. They don't need to bootstrap. So we have a concept of bootstrapping. Once you bring up the framework, you bootstrap, and when you bootstrap, that's when the content gets loaded. You can have totally different content if you have your own, right? If you want to bootstrap with instead of using the default, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and this is what I was saying, like Juana, this is what we wanted AI library to be. We just never got there.
Yeah, and I think so I think you're right there. And at least that was my interest in this specifically when we saw it presented previously. But I think there's an opportunity here for a number of different deployment models that I think, Joanna, you touched on, which is we can do a community-hosted one sitting in Operate First, where it just does become like a pure open source model exchange. But then individual companies have the ability to deploy it for their internal sharing of assets. So it seems to fit nicely. And that the fact that we seed it with a couple things like we did with AI library, that's great, right? If they're best of breed, even better. If they're just working templates, that's sufficient.
Yeah, that's exactly how I see it. It's hosted somewhere and OpenDataHub can push and pull from it. I don't know. I just feel like it's huge to be installed from within OpenDataHub as a framework. I feel like it's a framework on its own, but that's just my opinion. And
maybe that informs how we structure like how it gets contributed and deployed as something that's more purely optional because of that. Like maybe you just want to use the Operate First one versus having your own instance.
Yeah.
I maybe to clarify this, what Jonas said now kind of makes sense with like OpenDataHub, a specific deployment of OpenDataHub pulled from this exchange. Someone is making a lot of noise. Boris, if you can mute, I think it's you. But But the question is it possible? Like, so if let's say we have this deployed in operate first, the MLX, can a user just hit some button, configure where the model should be deployed, and get it that way, or does MLX have to be part of a deployment of Kubeflow or something that is integrated in one cluster, so that you can execute directly from the UI? Or what is the kind of the execution model for the users when they want to use MLX and they want to have that execution part there as well, Animesh?
So like the cheapest way is like, so if you want the execution part as well, like, the minimal way is to get it into just deployed with the Kubeflow pipelines with Tekton engine, right? So that was the default instruction: deploy MLX on Kubernetes or OpenShift. Now there is an option to deploy MLX on an existing Kubeflow cluster, right? So in that case, right, it will reuse the Kubeflow pipelines engine there, but the caveat is, it has to be the Tekton engine, right? It is currently not. We have not spent efforts to make it work with the Argo engine, right? So it's again, sort of narrowing down our scope and focusing on, where not to say that, that we won't venture there, but like, it's for now, the idea is to operate in that ecosystem, which is the Tekton and Kubeflow pipelines ecosystem, right? So, but yeah, so if you have existing engine, right? So in this case, you are just getting the API framework and the UX, right? So then it becomes pretty lightweight. And Christian, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, if there is an existing KFP and Tekton, how many extra microservices we might need right, for the API and the UX?
Yeah, so if you have an existing Kubeflow pipelines deployment with Tekton, you only need the API and the UI. So 2 more pods that get spawned on your cluster.
Yeah, so it becomes cheap that way. And then, yeah.
So I would agree that it makes great sense for kind of a larger deployments, not from like a resource perspective, but more from a user perspective. That's where you get the most benefit. But I would disagree with kind of what Juana said. It doesn't make sense for it to be part of OpenDataHub because we are targeting these deployments, right? We are targeting places like Operate First or companies that need this for their data scientists or universities or things like that. Where this could kind of bring that central point, kind of the entry point for if you don't know what you want to start with, maybe this gives you that entry point of prepackaged models, prepackaged pipelines, and then you can kind of go off and build your own when you learn more about how things work there.
Your guys' call, I think it should be an integral part of the OpenDataHub because this is the repo that was missing always from Kubeflow and everything else. Because as Animesh said, a company that has more than 10 models can't find them anymore.
And I'm not sure if we're saying different things. I think, in my mind, Vacek, maybe what you said was, like it's part of DataHub, but it's not necessarily it's not part of like the default deployment. If customers want it, they enable that in the deployment. Is that?
Yeah, well, I think that's up for discussion. I think that depends on how much value we see in this. If we say this is kind of a replacement for AI library and it solves the same purpose, AI library was kind of the core component since the beginning, and we wanted to have it there, especially for the people that come and they want to start with something. So right now, that start with something is kind of a Jupyter experience, whether that would be KF controller or Jupyter Hub doesn't really matter, but we kind of give people the empty workspace where they can start playing around. This would kind of give them the pre-fill workspace where there would be something to click and deploy and watch what is happening. So from that point of view, it makes perfect sense to me. The kind of other point of view for this is to consider that it has to come with KF pipeline and KF serving, and that is not a default part of ODH now. So we would have to figure out how to kind of whether we want to switch completely. So we want to, well, not completely, but we want to make ODH much more bloated in that sense, where KF pipelines and KF serving is always present, because otherwise we cannot deploy analytics by default because it doesn't give you anything, right? So we either have to make it more flexible.
Like just one correction, like KF serving doesn't need to be, right? So in a case like, if KF serving is not there, then, if you want to just deploy your models pre-packaged in containers on OpenShift or Kubernetes directly, that's the default option. But if you have KF serving, right, and then, it gives you all these different, endpoints, etc., in a standardized data plane, right? So KF serving part is optional, pipelines is not optional. Yeah.
But then what do the models do? Like if I have a pre-built model, how do I deploy it if I don't have KF serving?
The bare bone deployment option will be if on Kubernetes, it just gets pushed on Kubernetes in a container.
Okay.
Right. So that's the most bare bone option, right? But yeah, if you deploy it with KF serving, that's what we have integrated with, and
And maybe one more technical question, and that is, it probably does it require Istio to be also deployed?
If with KF serving, right, and if you are using multi-user functionality, right, so if you want the multi-user and the Istio pieces, then yes, right. Tommy, you have more details which you can show on that?
From a routing aspect, you will still need Istio in order to bind all the web page, let's say the Kubeflow pipeline experimental page inside MLX. But if you, let's say, without Istio, you could still run MLS. You lose the capability to redirect Kubeflow pipeline page within the same endpoint, because we're relying on Istio virtual service to bind everything into one same gateway.
So if there is some other ingress gateway like Vashek you have, right, in ODH which you are using, then it can be configured with that. Right.
Right. We're mainly just using Istio as a proxy gateway. You could use other services as well.
Also, guys, can you elaborate on Elira integration? What exactly are you guys doing there?
So the Elira one is right now pretty simplistic, right? So this is two ways. One, we use the Elira notebook component, right, to launch and integrate a registered notebook as a pipeline step. So Tommy, if you have an instance, you can show that demo. The second thing which we are working with the Elira team is that, they should be able to pull the registered components here via the APIs, and then, be able to drag and drop on the palette there. And you can, so essentially, that when the Elira acts as a front end, this provides a backend for all the different components through REST APIs. So Elira can pull the components, then, you have the palette there, you drag and drop there, and you create your pipelines. Here, in our case, we are using their notebook component, right? So single notebooks, not a pipeline, right? So suppose there are notebooks which are registered, and that capability is right now already integrated. You can just select that notebook and say run it. And when it runs it, it uses the Elira notebook component to launch it on the KFP and executes it and gives you all the results.
So there I see another opportunity for some collaboration, specifically with Thoth again. At least for the Python-based notebooks, to get predictability on the stack that's in the notebook. I think it could be useful, as well as maybe some UBI collaboration. We should explore that to push some more of the Red Hat value in that.
Yeah.
The reason I was asking this, Animesh, as far as I know, Elira today doesn't support route tripping. So you can push YAML, but you can't read YAML and show it in the notebook. And then, for me, the big thing that they don't support is pre-built containers.
You mean pre-built components? Yes, right. So that's something which is as depending on what you mean by but Until so far, it was notebooks, right? So drag and drop notebooks, create a pipeline and run. Going forward,
Right.
it will be
In
also,
their latest release, they integrate 2 or 3 YAML files, and that's the extent of it. So you can't just push pre-built container and make it a part of the pipeline using Elira.
yeah. So like that's what. So the first capability was notebooks, right? Drag and drop, create a pipeline. The second thing which they have added, and I believe which has already been released in preview, is pre-built components, right? So the capability which they have, which is now, there are some pre-built components which essentially are backed by containers. You drag and drop and create a pipelines and run it. The third thing which will be, then you pull from an external source, right? And this will be the external source which, you can register all these components in machine learning exchange, and they are able to pull, using the REST API, and then, from there you can drag and drop. So this gives you the capability to sort of, bring your own component or bring your own container, which you were talking about, right? Combined with.
Yeah, we can talk about it with you offline. I don't think they're moving in this direction.
Oh no, there's already like internal work happening, right? In a sense, like, the integration in terms of using this API as a backend, right, to pull components. They may not allow, like, just plug in from any other source, but this is going to be the backend from where the components can be pulled in.
All right. We have 5 minutes left. Animesh, if you want to do the demo.
Okay. So maybe Tommy, you want to go through the models one or data sets, one of those two? Depending on the 5 minutes, whatever can be done. Maybe the models one might be more interesting.
Yes. Give me 1 second. Let me just quit and rejoin quickly. I need to
Because of
give
those.
permission.
Okay. How about you, Christian? You were working on the data sets one, right?
Yep.
Can you share your screen?
Yeah.
Check it out.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Start. Sec. Click to start. Yes. Okay. This is the entire screen. Is it showing up?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a non-read-only deployment of MLX local cluster. And so here you can see, as Animesh presented earlier, we have all our asset types, right? Our datasets, models, pipelines, components, notebooks. And if you choose a notebook, for example, here, one of the popular notebooks is the NOAA weather data for the JFK airport. And you can see, some of the metadata in that on the right side here. And you can also see that you can launch this data set, and even better, you can launch it with a related datasets. And in this case, we have associated that this particular data set with a notebook. The notebook is called JFK Airport Analysis, and you can run that all in one. And so I'm gonna give it a name, the data set, BBC, put that in here. There's a mount path that we need for the data set. And then you can launch this. And if it goes well, that should trigger a pipeline launch in the backend. And we'll show you the pipeline here that we pull in from KFP. Then, as soon as data is available, we'll update it in this graph editor. And then once it's visible, you can see some of the input parameters and the logs, for example. And in the logs, you can follow along. In this case, you can see some Python output, installing the related packages. And then once it's done, it will show up green, and you can get, more details on that run and data that was generated by this. Excuse me. Okay.
So just to point out, this one is using the data shim behind the scenes, right? So a pre-integrated pipeline, right, which was generated as part of the dataset registry.
That's right. Excuse me. Okay, Tommy, did you rejoin?
Yes, sorry about that. Let me just quickly share like how the model could work.
Over, yeah.
So similarly to like the data sets inside the models, you could have a list of model with like similar YAML definition for the metadata and the about page as well. And you could launch like a models either serving onto like just plain Kubernetes, like plain deployments, or on Kiev servings. And you can also like get the serving code over here as well for both Kubernetes and Kiev serving. And another great capability is that you also could just register components by just uploading a packages files. And your YAML file is usually already specify a name, so you could overwrite that, or you could just use the default name. In this case, we could just use the default name uploaded. And once you upload it, you could probably see it's being posted on the models page, and you could go back and you probably see a new model getting registered over here. And to launch this, all you need to do is just select which platform you want to use. In this case, we're using Max model, where it might not have the capabilities to run on Kiev serving endpoint, because I think right now the new Kiev serving require you to use like the V1 and V2 API endpoint when you create custom models. So in this case, we're just deploying Kubernetes. So once you deploy, the process is pretty simple. It's behind the scene, it creates a pipelines to translate the metadata we have into a Kubernetes deployment. So it usually just take several minutes. Then once it's deployed, in a regular Kubernetes deployment, we will just assign like a node port, because we don't know what kind of API you were using in your model container. So we just give a whole new endpoint to you, so you could just serve your order on whatever API you're using. And in this case, this is a web page of the model, because this container also contains like a web API. So in this web page API, you could just get like the model you have just served and get all the information over here as well. So yeah, that's the overview for the models. Is there any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So now that you uploaded the model, does it show for other people, or is it just for me? Because I mean, then anyone can upload kind of anything, and it's visible to everyone. That's, I guess, not safe. So how does the multi-tenancy really work there?
At the moment, we only have like kind of two modes. Like we have user that's like anonymous, and another user that's like admin. So in the admin perspective, once you like, let's say, register a model, you could kind of like unfeature and unpublish it. So it would just hide behind like all the anonymous users, so other user cannot see it or run it. Once you kind of hide it as an admin. I think we are like in the process of adding more users on the and in terms of multi-user perspective, because we kind of encounter some issue with like assigning like different permission when you create as a new user. So right now we only have two different roles, like admin and anonymous.
Okay.
For MS at the moment.
And like, for example, these as you showed the like published and featured, where is it stored, that information, the metadata? Is it like somewhere in some custom resource or the database?
So this is stored in the database. So behind the scene, we have an API that talk to like but we're using the same MySQL database from GitHub pipeline. So we have a table that actually to store this kind of information. So when you click a publish, you just like change the database role to like say publish true or false. That's what we're doing behind the scenes.
Okay.
Yeah, and the idea is that if somebody uploads a model, an admin would have to go in, review that model, and then make that published and featured. It should show up here.
Got it. Thanks.
The same review process applied to any type of artifact, right?
Yeah, in fact, you were asking about notebooks, so maybe if you
Yeah, like for other components, in this case we only expose like kind of 8 components. With other stuff we kind of hide in the background. Same thing for like data set as well. All kinds of assets you have the ability to like unpublish and unfeature from like external perspective.
All right, everyone. 4 minutes past the hour. I think next steps, Animesh, maybe thank you very much for the presentation and the demo. I'm thinking the next step should be maybe open an issue on GitHub for OpenDataHub. We can discuss this there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes total sense.
All right. Thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.